Hey guys, we're still talking about probability. We're looking at data. If you look at the notes for this section, it's a lot. There's talks about a line plot or a dot plot, stem and leaf, but your entire self-check is actually what we call two-way frequency tables. So it's where we put data into a table, and then we have the total amounts on the bottom and on the side. So this first question, you're gonna have a lot that talk about the principle of independence. So the principle of independence is when something happens that's independent of everything else. That's why it's called the principle of independence. I'm looking for the actual description over here. So we say a statistic is independent when one criterion does not influence the relative frequency of the others. So when one doesn't affect the other, it's independent. So this two-way frequency table shows how many men and women are taking different classes. And it's asking us, is this a principle of independence? Is it not? Or do we just not know? So there is enough information to tell, and this is actually an example of the principle of independence, because it doesn't matter if they're taking history or math or English. If they take history, they can still take English. If they take math, it's sad, the numbers for math are low, they can still take other subjects. So they're all not related, so they are independent. So, and this is the same question, guys. I think like the first 5 questions look like this, and the only thing that changes is the numbers here. So, what class they would most likely take. So this is a principle of independence, because one does not affect the other. And then you'll get some that are different, where it's choose all that apply. So use the following scenario and frequency table to answer the question. Savannah wants to keep in touch with classmates and friends over the summer. She does a survey asking if they will be traveling out of state or if they're going to be in state for their vacations. She then asks if they would like to be contacted on a weekday or a weekend, and here's her results. Which of the following describes a conditional relative frequency? More than one answer may be correct. So when we're talking about conditional relative, the way to remember this is we're talking about the margins, but not the total. So this first one is out of the 32 friends who will be in state, that's this, in state, 32, 22 prefer to be contacted on a weekend, that's this. So this row, these numbers, 10 plus 22 equal this 32. And since we're talking about this total in the margins, and then the number that goes with it, this would be conditional relative frequency. So the next one, out of the 72 friends surveyed, 40 will be out of state. This is true, but the 72 is our very total. These in-state, out-of-state add to 72. The weekday, weekend, those add to 72. So because we're talking about the total, this is not conditional relative. That's not right. Okay, that would be marginal frequency. All right, of the 72 people surveyed, 10 prefer to be contacted on a weekday who will also be out of state. So this is just like what we just did. We're talking about the total here. We don't want the total. That's marginal, so we're going to get rid of that. Among the 26 people who prefer to be contacted on a weekday, 16 will be out of state. So now we're looking at this column. these 26 people, and 16 will be out of state. This is conditional relative because we're looking at the total of a column, not the total of everyone. So those two would be our answers. Okay, so use the following scenario and frequency table to answer the question. A member of the Fine Arts Committee wants to know what events the citizens are attending most and whether people think they are expensive. They asked 60 citizens in the survey if they attended the concerts, the plays, or art exhibits, and whether or not they were inexpensive, and obtained the following. All right, so this table is an example of the principle of independence, and we're checking all that apply. So they were asked about all three of these: art exhibits, plays, or concerts. A person could go to a play and an art exhibit. That's a possibility. So these are not independent of each other. So this is not an example of the principle of independence. Okay, next one. The statement 15 out of 60 attended plays and thought they were inexpensive is an example of joint relative frequency. So we're looking at the 15 that attended plays and thought they were inexpensive. So plays, inexpensive. We're looking at this 15 out of the total. So that is an example of joint frequency because we're looking at an inside number out of the total. If it's conditional, it'd be with a row. But the joint relative frequency is out of the total, so that's correct. None of these statements are correct. That's our next one. That's not true because we shuffle. It's not at the bottom. This table is not an example of the principle of independence. So this is true because we said it's not up here. All right, the statement 26 out of 60 surveyed thought their event was inexpensive. So we're looking at this 26 out of 60. Marginal relative frequency. Notice how these numbers are in the margin. That means it is an example of marginal relative frequency. That's true. And then our last one is the statement among 13 people who attended concerts, 6 out of 13. So we're looking here, 6 out of 13 is an example of conditional. And this is what we did on the last question. It's conditional if we're looking at a row or column total. That's true. It's joint if we're looking at the total in the bottom corner. So this is stuff you might want to write down. You might want to go over your notes and get some example problems because it's a lot of vocabulary. So we're going to do one more. Use the following scenario and frequency table to answer the question. Savannah wants to keep in touch with her classmates. Weekend, weekday, we've already done this. All that's different is the numbers have changed. So when we're talking about conditional relative, we're looking at a row total or a column total, not 72, not the total in the right corner. So among the 25 people who prefer to be contacted on weekdays, 14 will be out of state. So we're looking here, 14 out of 25. Because it's a column total, that is conditional relative. Of the 72, I'm just going to stop there. That's the total. That's what we don't want. It's not that one. And I can look at the very bottom of the 72. Nope. That's joint frequency. Don't want that. Of the 34 friends who will be in state, 23 prefer to be contacted on a weekend. So now we're looking at a row. We're looking at these 23 out of this 34. So that is correct. That's conditional relative. So that's all I'm going to do in this section. If you have more questions, ask me or Miss Hardy. Good luck, guys.